Okay, this is a video that's intended to correspond with a sort of landmark, so to speak, and that is the first 1,000 days of David Cameron's premiership. Cameron became Prime Minister on the 11th of May 2010 after defeating the incumbent Labour leader, Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown. It was quite a well-known election, on the grounds that there's a hung parliament, and of course it involved a week of intense negotiations. I don't know if it was as long as a week, but intense negotiations, and ultimately resulted in a Liberal Conservative coalition government with Nick Clegg, the Liberal leader, as Deputy Prime Minister. Now, in this video I don't want to talk so much about the Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrats, or necessarily party policy so much. I want to talk about David Cameron, the man, and some of the things that have highlighted his premiership and what I think of that premiership. First of all, I'm not a Conservative supporter. That's probably been obvious from some of my videos. There's many areas I frankly have contempt for the Tories on. But I want to try and make this video a little bit academic and not so much raw personal emotions. So I'll try and have an open-minded and balanced video, so to speak. So this isn't just a rant about Cameron. But I'll try and give an honest assessment of what I believe these 1,000 days have been like. The first 100 days, I have to say, I supported the coalition cautiously. At that time, I'd been a member of the Liberal Democrat Party, and I wanted to give them a chance, and I did sort of accept the rationale for forming a coalition government. Just bit my lip there. The rationale for forming a coalition government. Look, no party had an absolute majority, so a coalition was inevitable. There could arguably have been another general election, but I don't think the British public are quite apathetic, and I don't think they would have wanted another election. And Labour can whinge all they want, but they didn't make things particularly easy for the Lib Dems. They rejected many of the proposals that had been made for a Lib-Lab pact. One thing that has to be said, people at the time questioned, how can two parties that are so different get into coalition? But actually the same can be said of the Liberal Democrats and Labour. It's often assumed they're very similar parties, and that's a big mistake, because there's many areas they disagree on. The most prominent in recent years has been the Iraq War, but there's been numerous other issues that they disagree on. So the idea that just because they're assumed to both be left of centre parties, they would be more likely to be bedfellows is a bit misguided. Because there's a lot of areas, for example on ID cards, the Tories and Lib Dems were on the same boat with that. So there were some areas the Lib Dems and Tories see eye to eye on. So, like I say, I initially supported the coalition because I wanted to see the bigger picture. I could understand student anger at the time. This was the first prominent issue, was the student top-up fees protests. Now, I remember at the time a lot of people criticised the students and said, they just want things for free, or why are they protesting the spoilt brats, etc. But they weren't necessarily protesting at the hike in the fees. What they were protesting about was Nick Clegg's lie, and it was a lie. It wasn't like at the time Clegg actually genuinely believed that was going to happen. He knew that he couldn't deliver that promise about opposing top-up fees, and of course in government he went ahead and supported the plan to raise top-up fees. Whatever you think about that issue, the students' anger was justified. The violence wasn't, but their anger was, because they believed that they'd been misled, and they helped the Lib Dems get into power. The students were core Lib Dem voters. And the Lib Dems, needless to say, have been absolutely hammered in this coalition in terms of their reputation. Is that unfair? Maybe a little, because I do believe they've had some achievements and they have tried to push some liberal agendas through. So in the nature of a fair assessment, I think that has to be said. But I think the problem is Nick Clegg at times has appeared almost slavish to the Tories. He has tried to recant in recent months, and he's distanced himself from the Prime Minister in numerous areas. But anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Clegg. This is more about Cameron. Cameron himself has risked a lot of controversy from the Tories on issues like gay marriage, and a lot of Tories think he's been too sort of subservient to the Lib Dems. But what those Tories need to remember is it's a coalition government. Yes, it's a majority Tory coalition government, but there are Lib Dems in there, so they can't expect to have everything their own way. That is the nature of coalition government. It's the nature of seeing the bigger picture, the greater good of the nation. Now, why is I left? I abandoned my support for the coalition after those 100 days. I'll give you one reason, and that is a domestic reason, and that is workfare. This appalling practice of basically exploiting unemployed people to basically what happens is the government pays private companies to take on unemployed people and assign them to companies for cheap labour, and they're not paid for this. I think it's a complete abomination. I think it's a form of servitude, which is against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think it's utterly counterproductive, as the government's own figures show. And to me, this is the biggest stain on Cameron's premiership so far, his almost 3 years in power, is this disgraceful treatment of the unemployed in Britain, at a time when millions are struggling. From day one, the Cameron administration has relentlessly vilified, scapegoated, and punished unemployed people. And it's not that previous administrations didn't do that. The Blair and Brown administrations have a lot to answer for. They introduced workfare, I believe. I personally went through workfare in 2009 under Brown. So it's not just this government that's done it, but they have really enforced it. And some of the Tory statements on welfare and on unemployed have been north and short of disgusting. There was one Tory MP who claimed that unemployed people should lose the right to vote. There's others who have proposed starvation methods, i.e. cutting off food benefits to unemployed people. There's been a range of bigoted Tory views. Of course, leading Tories have tried to be a bit more cautious with their words, but the sentiments are very blatantly there. And the likes of Chris Grayling and Ian Duncan Smith have been absolutely on the warpath with this, and they've shown absolutely no moderation whatsoever. They haven't listened to the concerns of unemployed people, and they've basically played the tabloid game of promoting lies and distortion on the facts. For me, that's unforgivable. I believe that the scapegoating treatment of unemployed people has directly led to suicides, because it's made a difficult experience even harder. And this is shameful. It's the worst sort of cowardly populism, and this cannot be forgotten in Cameron's domestic policies. Indeed, it's fair to say that the cuts in general are a big hallmark of the Cameron administration. Now, I have to say, I'm not an economic expert, so I cannot claim to know perfect economic solutions. It's not my strong point, and I admit that. I don't claim to be an expert on economics. But I've personally been through workfare, and I know that if you are forcing people to do work, you should at least pay them, because anything else is exploitation. And it's reprehensible, quite frankly. And it's also reprehensible how this government has scapegoated the unemployed and had the audacity to claim it's designed as help. It's not. It's designed as punishment. It's collective punishment, and it's shameful. And the Lib Dems have shamefully supported this, and for that I can't forgive them, as have Labour. You know, Ed Miliband's language has been more moderate, but as far as I'm aware, they still haven't vocally opposed workfare. Anyway, austerity has been a major theme of the Cameron administration, and whilst I am not an expert in economics, I do think it's about time that the cuts program ended. You know, there may have been a justification for it at the start, but the coalition's harsh cuts, so fast, so soon, and so relentless, is not helping this country. We are experiencing very, very little growth. I think it's 0.35% or something. Unemployment remains very high. The official figures are a lot higher than the official 2.5 million. There's a government classes people on workfare as being employed when they're not paid, and many voluntarily leave it. The true unemployment figure is probably somewhere in the region of 5 to 7 million. So things are very tough for a lot of people. And whilst I wouldn't blame David Cameron personally for all of that, and by the way, I don't blame the Tories for unemployment itself so much, although I do think they should focus on job creation as opposed to cuts. But because it's absolutely disgraceful to scapegoat people and call them lazy benefit scroungers in areas where there simply are no jobs. That's just an abomination. Now I'm aware I'm already on 11 minutes here, so I'll focus a bit more on other issues. In short, I think the domestic policies of the Cameron administration are predominantly an abomination. His handling of the phone hacking scandal has not been good. He's basically been an apologist for the tabloid press, and the Tories are very closely linked with the Murdoch press, as the Blair administration was. This has really rocked this country, and it really is quite a stain. MPs' expenses, of course, was a big issue. I do believe Parliament has moved on somewhat from that. There's been a lot of new MPs. I believe that has changed things to some extent, but the phone hacking scandal, I'm not sure if that has changed a lot, because we still have arrogant tabloid editors hiding behind freedom of expression to argue that they can do whatever they like. What other issues have we had in this time? The West Cumbria shootings, of course, was early in the Cameron administration. A very rare event in this country, I have to say, gun violence on that scale. A renewed sort of insurgency in Northern Ireland, so to speak. Insurgency is probably the wrong word, but the real IRA, showing themselves to be the total scumbags that they are, have committed several killings. Libya, I believe, was justified, and I do differentiate between domestic policy and foreign policy. I believe Cameron is a humanitarian interventionist, and I back him on that. Let's be very clear about Libya. We removed a brutal tyrant. There was a popular mandate by the Libyan people, despite what Russia today says. The war was relatively quick. The situation is not perfect now, but I think in retrospection, history will show that intervention there was morally justified. Of course, the war in Afghanistan's continued. It's got more and more controversial, especially with British casualties now at 440. I believe an exit strategy, an exit time needs to be drawn up now. I think the Prime Minister's quoted 2014. That's very, very important. Because I still take the view that the intervention in Afghanistan was justified, and I don't believe it's been a total disaster as some people claim. But you can see my views on other videos about that, because I am running out of time here. I haven't included everything I'd like to in this video. Just briefly, I do believe there's been a surge of patriotism in the Cameron years, although that is not down to Cameron himself. We had the Queen's Diamond Jubilee last year, and of course the London Olympics, which was a very successful event, a great event, although I have to say some of the so-called volunteers were on the forced labour programme. But generally, there has been a surge of patriotism in recent years. The issue of Scots independence, I think the Union side is winning that argument, certainly looking at the polls. The Falklands, Argentina's playing up again. Once again, they're refusing to recognise the right to self-determination of the islanders. And I'll leave it there. I'll probably make another video at the end of the Cameron administration. That's David Cameron, 1000 Days. Thank you for watching.